Oh dear, we are live.
We have already gone live again, have we?
I'm telling you this time,
At least
so
this
that we.
time around, you didn't do so in mid sentence of mine.
No, you never know.
I'm assuming that the triumphant England football victory has just put you in a generous mood.
Oh, you know it. I'm, I'm good at that. Although whether or not the triumphant English victory has led to everyone going to bed early and not actually watching the stream is another thing entirely.
Well, I could well imagine that the Football World Cup as a phenomenon
Mm.
may well have an effect on viewership as a whole on YouTube.
Well, I definitely was not going to stream during the football. Let's put it that way.
You thought that might have been an act of futility.
Yeah, well, I thought it might be a little bit pointless, to be perfectly honest. I mean, even more pointless than it already is than our
So
usual
you,
viewership.
you just thought, just for the few people who hate football
Mm.
and the kind of exiled Scots, you wouldn't you wouldn't actually just launch a stream just for them. It just wouldn't be worthwhile.
Yeah, I thought for the all two people who weren't watching. Also, I started it a little later this evening anyway, or I was going to, because I'm aware that a few people get off work around this time who complain every time we do a stream that they're late to the party because
We don't wait for them.
we don't wait we don't wait for them, and they go, it's not the same, it's not. Which could be fair, although if the current viewership is anything to go by, which is probably just me loading the stream, we haven't got anyone watching right now.
But yes, this reminds me. I will have to kind of find your channel and find out what the address of this stream is, and then tweet it out.
I'll tell you what, I'll link it in the
Um,
sidebar. Here we go. There you go. I also didn't give them much notice. I only set this up about 15 minutes ago.
Well, yes, I recall receiving a tweet, a direct message of yours just saying stream 9:30.
That was supposed to have a question mark on the end of it. I don't know why.
Well, as I
Yeah.
say, it was your fervor that just got carried away with you after the England victory, I'm sure.
Indeed, although I still maintain, unfortunately, that Ronaldo's goal versus Spain the other day, which curved perfectly, arced round the head of the leftmost defender and just arced perfectly into the top left corner of the goal, was the best shot I've
But
seen.
I mean, let's not forget, where did he learn to play football?
Of course,
At
here.
Manchester United, here in England. So I mean, it basically explains itself. I mean, this time round, clearly we have got the greatest football team ever assembled in the history of mankind. There is no way that anybody is going to get in the way of us. They might as well just hand us the trophy now.
Joe Neverton in chat says it's worth pointing out that most of your viewership are probably off their faces right now. And Chancellor of Meme says we need a female fake accent for the sake of diversity. Yes, well, if you are aware of Sarah,
perhaps if you just speak in a high voice, not so obvious,
if you're aware of,
we can do the full Monty Python.
Oh, good grief! Yeah. If you're aware of Sarah from V Stream, she has expressed interest in coming on and joining us for one of these, and I've told her she'd very much be welcome, but she's not available tonight. But hopefully, in the next couple.
You mean to say when she comes on, we could debate meerkats?
We could debate meerkats. Now,
Yes.
why meerkats? Now, I'm clearly missing a reference here.
Alexander the meerkat. Oh, come on, please.
Yes, I know what you're. Oh, sorry. I take a drink from my glass of water, and you immediately assume that it's because I'm being slow. Goodness me. Trying to sneak something in. Yes, the gypsy. I'm aware.
Well, that is what academic agent refers to him as. I do not refer to him as a gypsy. I just make puerile references to the compare the Meerkat adverts.
Of course, how imperial of you! How very British! You wouldn't dare. It's like it's all a game. It's the great game to you of court and basically insulting people without them knowing they've been insulted.
Oh, I'm quite sure he is aware of Alexander the Meerkat. I mean, I cannot be the first person to point out a certain similarity of pronunciation. Maybe a voice.
Who's Sergei in that case?
That's a good question. Well, that would obviously have to be Sargon.
Sargon is Sergei. You can see him there in his little shirt.
You can hear it in the name, can't you? Sargon, Sergei.
It's all a conspiracy.
Yeah,
it's been 4 years.
It's thought out that way years ago.
It's a 4-year viral ad campaign for comparethemarket.com. That's their entire channel base, etc. That wouldn't surprise me at all, to be honest. Oh, no, it'd be very funny. Accidental fame, that sort of thing.
I'm just looking at Twitter. I've just tweeted out this thingamajig. I'm just looking at Twitter, and we've got all sorts of stuff still going on because of my football tweeting. To the people in the audience, I was doing a lot of tweeting about how inevitable England's victory was.
Of course.
Which of course it was. I mean, we all knew that it was about to come, and that the winning goal would happen pretty much in the last minute of the game. So yes, I was having a lot of fun there, but in between that, there was still some diehards calling me racist and all sorts of things from last night's conversation. Because of course I, together with one or two other people, I kind of dared stand up to the America is the worst country in the world. The West is the worst part of the world. All just inhumanity, cruelty, and brutality against racial minorities. And
I don't know where you and V seem to find these people, or do they find you?
I don't know. I basically asked somebody who goes by the name at Muslim IQ. I mean, I'm sorry, but that person like that is asking for it.
Yeah.
Who basically was, he had put out some tweet again. I mean, I don't remember it verbatim now off the top of my head. It was very late last night. But yes, it was pretty much just about how horrible it all was over here. So I basically asked him, given that was his moniker on Twitter, whether he could show me the humanitarian era of the Muslim world then.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, one always kind of tried to answer it, but deliberately missed the point by a few yards every time, in order to try and be able to provide an answer without actually directly answering, if you know what I mean.
One of these sort of dodge things. Oh, I've only got 240 characters. Oh, you wouldn't possibly understand. How can you not get this? Is my favorite answer, and it's like because you just go. Well, it's one of two things, isn't it? Right? Either you're wrong and so disconnected from reality, which is likely, or you're a terrible educator. I did get into an argument with someone about communism, right? And basically, I said to him in a rather inflammatory way, and quite deliberately so, communism is the perfect system. If you change one key aspect about humanity and remove all of their vices, right? It's the most moral system if you have no emotion.
Yes, if you're dealing with robots.
Indeed, It's the perfect system for robots. Anyway, he couldn't get over the idea that I'd said it's perfect, but humans aren't perfect, so it doesn't work, and therefore capitalism, works much better with the human sort of the virtues and vices. It allows for philanthropy. It allows
for our motivation to effectively do some sort of work. Yes,
and I wouldn't have it another way, because robots don't do innovation either, which is why, as well,
the key bit about the whole thing with communism, that it doesn't really work for mankind. I believe it was Lenin who actually already conceded that.
Probably,
He
but
basically argued that what we needed was a new man. And that therefore, effectively, we would have to educate a new human being into being so that that person would then be compatible with communism.
I do find it funny because Christianity kind of already sort of says this in a weird kind of way, because one of the main things of Christian rhetoric, particularly in the New Testament, post Jesus, etc., etc., they talk about basically when you become a Christian, when you are baptized, you become a new creation. You have a new set of values, which are these religious values, and they sort of supersede what you were before.
Mhm.
And I think he probably was aiming for, or sort of perversely mirroring that. But when I was talking about, the lack of innovation, and even if you make someone, compatible with communism without having to use force, or just by re-educating, shall we say, then communism doesn't work, because robots and people who are not thinking that way do not have innovative thought. They don't really think
Well,
in the same way. And I was watching a video of someone who operates capitalism.com, and basically he was having an argument with someone who was saying that there will still be industries when communism comes around, or socialism, but there will be passion industries. And I saying, well, there are many industries that exist in society today which are nobody's passion and would never be anyone's passion, and the only reason why they are done is because they are well compensated, and that is that. So
so
even
what
if
you're
you
saying is sort of the workman-like end of society needs to kind of function on the basis of a compensatory system.
and
Otherwise, it
this is
simply won't work. So when it
indeed.
comes to cleaning the sewers or being the cleaning lady or something mundane, there needs to be the motivation of finance. Otherwise, why would someone do it?
Indeed, or
Whereas
some sort of
person
tangible.
composing classical music or or making films
No, we're
or building space rockets. I mean, those kind of things the Soviets proved very good at.
yes, and nobody is. They were when they were pushed to it, but they didn't really
Well, no,
innovate.
no,
So you see
no,
this
I
again.
think you can say they were innovative, and they didn't just do it because they were being pushed or forced. So I think as that argument went, in kind of passion industries, in the areas where they feel a driving passion to achieve something,
Yes,
that's where great things can be achieved because people are not doing it for the money in the first place.
yes, and they happen
But if it
irrespective of
comes to just,
the system, but more of it happens with a freer system.
I'm not
Um,
even sure you can say that because, I mean, the Russians gave the Americans a very good run for their money in the space race. So it may be that at times what are overall inferior systems can actually be the equal of, or sometimes even be the better of, another system. But
I suppose because mainly I'm drawing my examples here less from Soviet Russia and more from sort of Maoist China. I think that the kind of rote obedience that is required from such a system naturally stifles.
well, yes, but that is more of a cultural thing when it comes to the
Well,
Chinese
I
rather
think that
than
innovation persists
demolition
sort of.
ideology.
I think innovation persists sort of despite, like, the Russians were very good at identifying people who would be passionate in a certain area, and they were very good at pushing the national identity. Like, I have no doubt that even today, Putin has a very high legitimate approval rating, whether or not it's slightly inflated due to his own um, due to his own sort of machinations is another thing entirely. But I'm sure that he is well liked.
Well, it's inflated due to the fact that he's getting rid of opponents. I mean, in that regard, his machinations don't really allow the others to get anywhere. But one has to be fair. When it actually comes to it, he does actually dominate the polls. So he would more than likely even win a fair fight. It's just that he doesn't give anyone a fair fight.
So again, moving back to sort of the crux of the matter of like the idea of passion industries versus non-passion industries. If we can accept that passion industries exist in both systems, the idea that the non-passion industries you either have to force people to do or this is why I think capitalism will inevitably would lead us closer to what the communists imagine their utopia to be than socialism or communism really will, because we are automating at a rate now that has never before been seen. And so more and more of those nasty jobs will, or sort of the unbearable jobs, shall we say, will disappear over time. Although there will still be a high demand for engineers to repair said systems. But I really don't see under what they want to usher in inordinately quickly that being possible. And they forget, I think, a lot of these sort of more middle class people, they forget that under their system there still need to be people who till the fields.
Well, this is, one of the problems. This is one of sort of the great challenges we're facing, as in what to do with ourselves. I mean, when you listen to, academic agent and his friends, these markets, they basically create themselves. There will be more work than ever because we'll all be creating computer games and slimming programs. That may be, but we may also run into a complete calamity for some time before the economic system has any chance of resetting itself, because the rate of change once it starts hitting may be so ferocious that human society struggles to actually adapt itself to it.
Well, this is something I brought up on an Unpopular Opinions once before, was we're at a period of history where innovation over time, innovation in terms of technology has been increasing exponentially. And we are now at the stage where sort of there are new professions and new ideas and new standards of technology being produced. I believe at the last count, it's every 6 months.
Well,
The rate of
what
is
I have
increasing.
heard is that actually revolutionary ideas have slowed down.
Well, that's been the case since the invention of the
gradual innovation and whatever, because it's nowadays distributed over more industries because we've created industries that previously never existed.
Yeah.
So we get gradual innovation inevitably across all those industries, but the kind of seismic shift, if you know what I mean, that someone comes up with an invention that is the equivalent of the aeroplane or the car or the steam engine.
I really don't think we'll see something on that level until someone invents an alternative to the combustion engine. We harness tidal power in some way, because that is, as soon as someone cracks that, then we have effectively limitless energy. But the next thing, because
People
at the moment,
take to your sheds. We need tidal power.
we need tidal power. Everyone to the sheds. I actually had a good chat with someone who was doing their dissertation on at university on this sort of thing, and some interesting ideas. But the general gist of it is like, because I don't see space travel at this point being something reasonable in terms of, I mean, I could see that we might establish a colony somewhere, but I don't think that in the terms of like mass availability of transportation between
forget about mass availability of transportation. Who would want to go there? What we effectively need to find is either criminals whom we send there to colonize it, or a bunch of Puritans for whom
Are we going
the
to?
world isn't Puritan enough, and therefore they wish to live elsewhere and be Puritan, more Puritan elsewhere.
So are we going to rename Mars sort of
Penal Colony 1, yes.
Is it Australia 2 or the United States of Mars? That would be the question. Elizabeth says, who decides which accents are fake? A certain Miss Ray Murasami decided at some point that Mayan Britishers' accents were terribly fake.
Well, actually, I mean, you must have had it before, Ray. I mean, I've constantly been told that I'm putting on some accent.
Oh yes, you're South Korean, you're North Korean.
Precisely. I've got it. I've got it. My true origins stem from just about every single location on the planet, as far as my comment section is concerned. That there are so many people who are absolutely convinced that this is all just sham.
Silly Sailor says, revolutions, the cell phone, the shipping container, the internet. I would argue that probably the largest.
Can I make a confession here? I mean, one which would...
You're Silly Sailor.
Yeah, of course. One which would make Academic Agent proud of me. I once read a book on the shipping...
You read a book? Goodness me.
Well, I mean, I know that's a surprise enough, but I read a book on the shipping container.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I know that sounds incredibly nerdy.
Just dry, to be honest.
I think it's just called The Box. It's actually quite a good read. At times it gets terribly boring, but in other areas it does read a bit like a story.
Mm.
And it just basically tells the story of this chap who invented the shipping container. And apparently when he died, container ships all around the planet tooted their horns when they were burying him.
Oh.
It was I mean, this guy really single-handedly invented the industry, and it was entirely an American creation. But the reason it fascinated me was because now you see containers everywhere.
Yes.
And yet, I remember a time when they weren't around. At least in the part of the world where I was growing up, they weren't around, and gradually they started coming in. And that's why when I saw there was a book on it, I just thought, this is kind of interesting. I would like to know what actually happened. How did this actually occur? Because if you think of it, how could you ever build a container port? Because what would be the point of one container port?
Yes, of course. I wonder how many containers are now newly in Outer Mongolia, where you grew up.
Yeah, precisely. So the question simply is, you either have the system, or you have you have none of it at all. And that's why it's a brilliant system, but how on earth would you ever introduce it? Particularly because it's so, thirsty for capital. And this guy, if I remember rightly, he actually bought some old tankers and then kind of had the decks ripped open and the kind of the kind of guide rails put in so that they could lower containers into the ship. And I think he had ships. He had some cranes on the harbor, and I think later he experimented with having some cranes on the ship itself. And the reason, of course, Academic Agent would be doing his nut over this is because it's full of figures as to by how much he improved efficiency.
Yes.
So you would have, I mean, you have to imagine this situation that you would have a ship come in and it would dock for the day. It would dock for the day. It would have to be gradually unloaded, these kind of break bulk ships. And then this one ship comes in and he's got a crane or two set up in order to help unload the ship. And this ship comes into harbor, it unloads, the crane unloads it, then loads the new containers onto the ship, and the ship leaves within hours.
Mm.
And the entire shipping industry is just aghast, as in, hang on a moment, we all go into port and we stay there for the day. This ship has just come in and it left something like, 6 hours later.
Yeah.
And that's when they all realized, oh God, we're all obsolete.
I wonder. So I think about this in a similar space in terms of internet advertising versus television advertising over the past sort of decades.
Yeah.
And you just think, because people still pay an inordinate amount for billboards and television advertising, and realistically most advertising now filters through people through Candy Crush, on the
It's
train
frightening, isn't it?
on the train to work,
Yeah.
or I knew a man who actually wrote the software. He lives in China, although he operates out of Hong Kong. And he wrote the code that basically most companies use to put the ad on their little app or game or whatever. And he made an inordinate amount of money off that, and I knew him because we played the same video game. It was very strange. But basically, he does very little now, except occasionally do a quality of life update when the next version of Android or iOS comes out to ensure that his code still works. But it's a very strange one, because you wonder how soon, because obviously something like the BBC has never operated with advertising.
Yes.
Now it's operated off the. It's operated.
They say they don't advertise, but of course they do. They just advertise for themselves.
Yes. But what I mean is they don't, and typically they're much shorter ad breaks as well. But they, they've operated off funding, and you wonder what will happen when all TV channels will end up having to follow this model because their own advertising space is worth so little. You've already seen the decrease in the value of advertising space for most channels on the internet, most channels on the television. Sorry, apart from the ones with the big shows on. So you wonder how people will sustain themselves now that most people just want to advertise, given the wealth of information available through social media, which I maintain is probably the most important innovation of the last decade. And you just go, social media has changed the way our society operates in terms of provision of goods and services in the last 5 years in a way that hadn't been seen for 30, 40 years.
Well, I think in all fairness, it has changed our way of operating within certain demographics. I think there are a great many people who are completely untouched by it, but because those are the older generations, as they die out, it will just take over the entire, the entire society. So, in decades to come, we will have old grannies with smartphones watching YouTube or being on Twitter.
One of my
whatever the equivalent is then. I mean, I could well imagine these things get replaced over time.
Yes,
whereas at the moment, that's just unthinkable.
One of my favorite memes at the moment happens to be a picture of someone saying, "My, great grandmother in 1912," and it's got a very austere sort of photo, black and white family perhaps, and it says great grandmother 2012, and it's some Instagram post of that, and then next to it it's got sort of what she looks like now, and it's this sort of old tattooed lady with a smartphone wearing hot pants or something. It's just this obscene image compared, like, none of the nobility, shall I say, of the previous.
Well, it's not necessarily nobility, but there was a sort of severity and restraint in those old pictures. They were really posing, weren't they?
Yes, indeed.
I mean, it's funny because I mean, I know this now sort of goes off into really strange territory, but this is just it. when it comes to Victorian imagery and whatever, sexiness needed to be learnt. So
Yes.
the nudes of the Victorian age and whatever, those photographs are completely useless. And it
Mm.
isn't because, oh, tastes have changed or whatever. It is because people simply didn't know what to do in front of a camera.
No.
And so that's why when you see family photos and whatever, they're all just standing there completely wooden because they had nothing to compare it with.
Apart from, of course, the other equally wooden photos that they had previously seen, if at all. I do believe there was a cultural trend that you were just not expected, and you were expected not to smile in your photo.
You were expected to be sort of serious, but my guess is that more
I
than
think
likely came from paintings.
yes, when you had a self-portrait done and you wanted to look imposing, or
Yes, you
sort
wouldn't be there smiling like an idiot, would you?
no.
But generally the whole demeanor of photography, it gradually relaxed over time. And it just did seem to be that people were just simply sort of too self-aware. Perhaps it was also just too much of an occasion. And eventually, as it became more commonplace, people were no longer that intimidated by the act itself.
Silly Sailor says, is it not also because they had to be motionless for a long time with the camera tech?
I would expect that will have had considerable amount to do with it, but I would still say that if you look at some of those old photographs, some of them are that awkward that you sort of feel, well, no, it does appear they just don't know how to handle themselves, because in a strange way, pictures are a language.
They are.
And we kind of learn the language by seeing lots of other pictures. And of course, now kids on social media and whatever are so clued up about posing and whatever on for their
it's an
pictures for social
entire
media.
it's an entire industry.
That is because they are so involved in the language of imagery.
Yes.
Whereas if you went back to my age when I was 20, in my teens or whatever, it would have been much more awkward. And that was because you weren't kind of swimming in an ocean of imagery.
No, and you had to get the horse and cart into town as well.
I mean, one of the things that I, for example, noticed is the kind of the language of imagery just in things like music videos and whatever. The good ones as opposed to just the rubbish ones.
So the 99%.
It has become so sophisticated that it's kind of remarkable. And you can see that everything kind of has learned from what has gone before and whatever. And it needs to do so in order to be able to still be something sophisticated for the next generation of young people who themselves have become more sophisticated in their understanding of imagery without their really ever needing to be educated in it.
Joe Neverton says this is a whole field of study known as semiotics. It's a growing aspect of consumer behavior. And the Harry Channel says Britisher wasn't born. He was created in a lab when someone spilled Yorkshire gold into a vat of chemical eggs.
I like that. I like that a lot. Or I could just be a kind of male version of Pygmalion, couldn't I?
I still maintain. I still maintain that you are, in fact, a time-traveling wizard.
Oh, yeah, well, I could live with that. Yes.
Who takes notes on history and is secretly in the back of.
Hence, I'm so good at predicting football results.
I don't say you go into the future. It holds no appeal for you, imperial man. But you do return to the past in order to take notes, and I'm still waiting for anyone in either this or Britishers community to basically Photoshop the Britisher into the background of famous paintings with a little notepad and
someone actually did that.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, Ryan, what's he called? Ryan, I forget his name. Forgive me, Mr. Ryan something. But no, you made a very good job, and I did see some paintings where it was it pretty much like "Where's Wally?"
Oh yes.
I was somewhere within the painting. I was one of the heads. Yes,
Was this tweeted at you?
yes, that was tweeted. Yes.
Oh, I'm going to have to find it now. Whilst I scroll.
Mr. Ryan something, again, I'm terribly sorry about not remembering the name. He has also done some picture work for the Academic Agent once in a while, which I believe he tweeted to his associate's Twitter account, Sly Sneak.
Is this Rhine as in Rhine?
It could be Rine, I'm not sure.
I can't seem to find it, but you'll
Either
have to.
Rine or Ryne. I don't think
Goodness.
there's an H after the R.
Well, you'll have to find it for me at some
You
point.
mean to say I'll have to sort of dig my way through all this Twitter stuff? I mean, here's just one of the latest tweets I received today regarding this. This is just while we've been on air. This is still regarding my daring to stand up to some of these people who, it's all about reparations, and it's all about how the West is just the cruelest place on earth. And if you question that, or if you even point out, look, if you wouldn't have wanted America or Britain to be the global hegemon as they were over the past 200 years, well, whom would you have instead? The Japanese, the Chinese, who would you rather have dominated the earth than the brutal, cruel-hearted British and Americans,
Yes, those terrible people who brought roads.
Then you get this answer back, I'm sure not buying the "aren't you glad we murdered and pillaged your society? Those other guys would have been much worse" argument. I think this guy is a bit of a white supremacist, but British white supremacists seem much more polite than American white supremacists. So there you go. That's me.
You just look at something and you go, the quality of life everywhere other than, say, America or Britain is so much lower, and the ones which have a comparable level are operate at a similar standard. So you go, sort of, why would you when you look at somewhere like China, which actively suppresses its own people, and you go, well, you're advocating for that kind of regime over here. I don't understand why that is desirable, but I think it links back definitely to my idea that people are so disconnected nowadays from suffering because we are in the longest period of prolonged peace in Europe that has ever been in all history for all time. And that's relative peace.
And I think they're all used to having reasonable governments. So, not perfect governments, but reasonable governments.
Yes, and even when they mess up, they will.
And therefore,
the
when
process
you kind of confront them with the idea of, have you any idea how horrible some of the regimes in the rest of the world are?
One of the things
confronted with this attitude of them, they're actually thinking that everybody is roughly like the governments are here.
Yes, which is,
so if you went to Syria or Jordan or Iraq or Iran or whatever, oh well, no, that won't be much different than here. It will just have a Muslim flavor to it, and you just think, I think you will actually. I think you would find it would be considerably different. I mean, those people literally do have torture chambers.
Yes. The important thing to realize, like, I went to Kenya some years ago now, and basically Kenya was the largest wake-up call I have ever had to how good we have it and how profoundly ungrateful we all are when it comes to that, and how the attitude of the people there was in some ways a lot more positive and healthy than we were. But the corruption sinks in the cities, but in the rural areas it's usually fine. But to the point where the government there is so corrupt that everybody knows it. to the point where they're so disenfranchised that you say the idea of having an election there doesn't even basically doesn't even have any kind of credence. It's not a conversation you have because it doesn't matter because it's all rigged.
Yes. Yes.
And everybody knows that. And whereas you might find a lot of students who are disenfranchised nowadays and who think that there are still politically minded students, and there still are these other sort of groups who, like the Liberalists, are trying to get stuff done here. But in Kenya, for instance, you only go into politics because you want to get rich quick. And you basically, the majority of politicians out there, from what I can tell, one of two things happens. If you fail to be a politician, you try as best you can to earn some money in the city, and then you bet it all on the football, because they're very, very into their football out there. The first thing I saw when I touched down in in Nairobi airport was a Manchester United sticker on the back of the taxi. And they adore football, but they get so much worse. Like, you talk about hooliganism here. If your team loses, you don't go out because the winning team and the people who support them will kill you.
They own the streets,
right? And the ones, if your team does lose and you had all of your money on it, which happens far more often than you might think, you find an awful lot of people find a very tall building and will quite happily lob themselves off it, because there is a huge cultural impetus on making something of yourself and making it very quick.
Also, it sounds like a very, very healthy society.
It's not. It really isn't. But the people who go into politics who succeed make as much money as they can before they are 35, and then they get out of the country because they know that their next rival who wants to make money wants their position and will come after them effectively. So they don't do it.
Yeah, they've kind of they've got a short term, and in that time they need to make it and then get out.
Silly Silly says the taxi you found was probably stolen from Manchester and whisked off in a shipping container.
It's an interesting one with football T-shirts, because you just stirred a memory there. That was, I remember in the insurgency in Iraq, when after the occupation, basically for some time it kind of completely ran out of control, and then ISIS came along and whatever. You had a lot of sort of religiously motivated fighting, and to a certain extent, it's all about a clash of cultures, because you've basically got these kind of, in a way, adherents to backward Middle Eastern cultures, kind of realizing how Western influence, and I'm not talking military occupations or whatever, but Western influences as such are just growing, and they're unstoppable. And to a large degree, one is actually rebelling against that. That is also behind, to my mind at least, a lot of the fundamentalization in the Muslim world, in the Middle East. And here was this chap standing there with one of these rocket-propelled grenade launchers on his shoulder, and he had his his kind of scarf wrapped around his head, so you could only see his eyes.
Yep.
And then he was there in a pair of Nike trainers with blue jeans and an Arsenal T-shirt. And I just looked at him and I just laughed. I thought, I really just thought out, just thought to myself, you've already lost. You don't know that you've lost, but you've already lost. Because the moment you actually adopt all the Western things, whether you want it or not, you are a Westerner.
Yeah, well, there's a lot that the influence is unavoidable. Yoshiki80, we did watch the game. It was R.I.P. Tunisia. What a stunning header towards the end. But we quite quickly got off topic, I'm afraid.
But yes, we did see one of the greatest football matches ever played by England. It was effectively just an exhibition match by England, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't as if they took the opponent very seriously. They even gifted them a trainer, a penalty, just to give the goalie some practice time. It was a clear-cut victory right from the start. And
because the two miskicks were clearly to confuse and befuddle the opponent.
England were that much in control that just for the sake of tension and drama, they could steer it and control it so precisely that they would score the goal in the dying minutes of the match. I mean, that shows you just what level of control they possessed over the whole occasion. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Brazil, Argentina, Germany, Belgium, and any other upstarts, they might as well just leave. There's no point of their being there.
Yes, indeed. Silly, not silly sailor. The Harry channel says, "Sorry for being late. Does the move of key people to UKIP dilute the Liberalist movement?"
The Harry channel, is this vernaculus in disguise? Because you see, I always refer to vernaculus as Harry.
I see. Basically, I think the Liberalist is in a difficult position right now, particularly the UK movement.
Because their leadership is going elsewhere.
Thank you. I'm not going anywhere, but not for the time being. Anyway, but Sargon, for instance, is a key influencer for the Liberalists. He's not one of the leaders, and that's very deliberately by design. Him and Dankula and PJW sort of joining UKIP and encouraging their audience to do so really is their own thing. It's not moving away from the Liberalist movement. It's not moving the Liberalist movement towards UKIP or away from it either. It's just a thought that he has had as an individual, sort of doing that with them. That doesn't mean that he's less committed to seeing where the Liberalist project goes, but the Liberalists are obviously a very much younger project than UKIP, and are still really establishing themselves, and it's going to take a few years before it's really fully established.
So what you're saying is you're not intending to join UKIP anytime soon?
Well, that's not our official position, although we have a number of members who have. Am I being a good politician yet?
You're sounding like a cabinet member right now.
Oh, for goodness sake. It's not like we're not advocating people to do it. We're not stopping people and saying, don't you dare join UKIP with that defector Sargon. Oh, no. He's not defected, and it's really neither here nor there. Basically, we have had...
Have you received a lot of questions whether you are joining UKIP?
It's been debated within the group. I haven't received many questions, but then I haven't really talked to anyone who's outside the group at the moment today.
I see.
And really, this has only been going on for about 24 hours. I know Kevin Logan was talking with Sargon about it earlier on both channels, on the Thinkery, I think it was, and that sort of thing. I am curious, just from the perspective of the people watching right now, what you think of the Liberalists as sort of just as a concept, necessarily, more than what it currently stands as, and whether or not you think it's all a bit of a LARP, and whether or not you think it has any. Are you
asking myself, or are you asking the chat here?
I am asking the chat, and then I will ask you,
okay.
And that sort of thing. So I'm posing it to the chat so that they can have the time to formulate a coherent and relevant response of something along the lines of and and then I will move. So what's your opinion, Bridger? Because you've had a chat with us.
Well, I remember, when the whole thing was perhaps just a glint in people's eye, or when it was just starting out. Because if you remember, I had some problems with Skype accounts and whatever, and therefore it kind of was a bit of an abortive operation.
Yes.
But I remember having sort of some conversations with Sargon at the time, and what I said to Sargon is, it is the attempt that ennobles. That, as far as I'm concerned, one should never laugh at anybody for trying to make an attempt at something. however small the chances are, because if there is anything that is really needed in Britain today, it is another party. It is some sort of other party that is not corrupted by situations past and present, and therefore the idea of creating another party in order to try and bypass the existing parties is perfectly laudable. And I know that I know this example is perhaps slightly dubious due to the fact that I think it was in a way a con job in France, but we can see that it is possible. So in France, I think it was 18 months from the creation of I forget what the name of the party was anymore, but it's Emmanuel Macron's party. It's his vehicle. And they went within 18 months from creating it to winning the general election. Now, the reason I sort of add caveats to that is because I think there was some cooperation with the Conservatives and the Socialists going on. I think that both the Socialists and the Conservatives saw that new party as a kind of spare tire to have handy should they fail, and they would need someone else to take on the National Front and Le Pen, because as far as I was concerned, they were much too slick for a party that supposedly was made up of amateurs. It had much too professional a feel to it, and on top of that, of course, Emmanuel Macron was a former minister of the socialist government, a finance minister, I believe.
Yes, so experience with the system.
Wasn't it called En Marche? I think that might have been the name of the party.
You're just stealing that from the comments where Dominic has kindly elucidated.
Sorry, I'm not even looking at the comments. I'm sorry. Hence I'm asking stupid questions. Yes, there it is.
I know that you definitely
you
definitely snuck back in time to have a look.
I'm actually seeing that it was Dominic mentioned it twice there. So yes, he must have got impatient with me wondering whether I could remember it or not. But by the way, it's got an E at the end of it. Oh no, in the second one he has got an E. I stand correct. I stand corrected in my correction. But no, it is therefore possible for somebody to create something new and have a go. I think in this particular day and age, that is possible. And given that the existing parties seem to just have run out of steam in any way, shape, or form, and particularly because all of them in this country are entirely signed up to the progressive agenda.
Yes,
it may indeed be necessary for something new to come along to topple them all together.
So the goal of the idea of the liberalist movement overall is definitely, again, excuse me, Britisher, but I'm referring mainly to the chat, although I will address some of what you've said. The goal of the liberalist movement overall is to be a cultural phenomenon. But in the UK, we're uniquely placed in the way that the UK political climate sort of leans itself much more towards being a political beast as well, because we have situations and organizations like Momentum, which have a lot of influence, that we would probably, and they have 40,000 members. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable number of people that you could get on board with the liberal ideal, etc. But basically, we are floundering a little bit at the moment in terms of trying to gain proactive people who are willing. So I say probably 10% of our member base are proactive enough to follow what we're doing very closely. And then a smaller percentage of that, which is yet to reveal itself, are going to be very active at sort of doing things within the movement. And that's out of 1,200.
Well, that's the difference, isn't it, between members of a party or followers of a party and activists.
Yes.
And activists are a very rare breed.
There's an interesting thing I noted, that UKIP was sort of stumped in its tracks when the Conservatives basically stole their thunder and said, we're going to have a referendum on European membership.
Yes.
And that basically they co-opted the idea because they realized that there was a whole group of people who were not going to listen to anything that they had to say and really wanted this, and this voting bloc could be theirs if they only pandered in that specific way. So I wouldn't have a problem if we became, revolutionary enough on the intellectual front that the existing parties were forced to change their tune. That's what I want to happen. Basically, I wouldn't be opposed to the Liberalists becoming a political party and fielding candidates and that sort of thing. Again, that's a 15-year, because again we're different to France.
Well, I
That's
mean,
really
it took UKIP 15 years,
yes,
more or less.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
So if it was going to be that kind of project, that's how long a timescale we're talking about. Good evening, Tacitus. Nice to see you. And Britain also responds better than somewhere like America to independent parties and candidates coming up, which is why we have seen this sort of, you get this surge in approval for the Liberal Democrats. They get it wrong, or it doesn't go as well as they could have managed it. You get the surge in popularity for UKIP. It gets the issues that were actually driving UKIP get co-opted into the existing parties. And I really see sort of third parties as a vehicle to transfer sort of a consciousness of what the voters want to the existing two parties as well.
It's funny that you mention the Lib Dems, because this is where I've got a confession to make, and where it ties in to some of the events and the original question asked, and that is that once upon a time I was a member of the Liberal Democrats, and the reason this is almost a confession is because, I mean, these days I kind of wonder what on earth was I thinking. But back then I kind of needed still to learn, because I was young and innocent, that the Liberal Democrats may have had the word liberal in their party name, but that was quite a bit different in theory.
Yes.
And that was, I mean, when I entered the party and I got to speak to local party members and whatever, it was as though I was a member from a person from a different planet. It was quite clear that any talk of liberalism, of kind of, how shall we sort of say, the idea of being permissive of other people's ideas and things like that, was just completely alien to so many people within that party.
Yes.
What it was is that, of course, the Liberal Democrats are the product of a merger of two parties. That there were two parties that basically had nowhere else to go. One was the old Liberal Party that once upon a time, yonks ago, had been one of the dominant parties, but had fallen on hard times. And the other were the Social Democrats, which were a breakaway party from Labour. And what basically happened is that you kind of meshed the two world views together. So you got a bit of Labour light and the liberal perspective. And the thing is, that just doesn't work.
No, and this is why academic Asia wants to purge the Social Democrats.
And that's why, I mean, as far as I know, there is still a breakaway party of the original Liberals who refused to join up with the Liberal Democrats, but they are very, very far and few between. But it kind of took that very, very painful episode for me to kind of gain the insight that the Liberal Democrats just don't work as a concept. They have been fatally flawed from within due to the fact that they have the Social Democrats there. And the Social Democrats simply don't attribute any value to free speech, to free expression, to those sort of ideas. And if you have some people within a party like that who are completely indifferent to those things, it basically means they don't have a sufficiently high priority. And therefore, for the liberal part of that party to seek to campaign in any way, shape, or form on those issues is just made impossible, because they are all always priorities that the other wing of the party is willing to sacrifice.
Yes, I think that that any alternative party at this stage, the main strength of it is going to be a rejection of the progressive consensus.
Well,
Now, at the moment, you're seeing a very, very aggressive rejection. Where the people who are Sargon's comment thread, the people who are hardest hit, the people with the edgiest opinions, right?
yeah,
Those are the people who are reacting first, because it's very much like I can't remember where the quote is from, where he says, "First they came for the Christians, but I did nothing because I wasn't a
yeah,
Christian."
it's a German priest.
Yes, that was right. And then they came for the Jews, but I did nothing because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me. And you just say, yes, that's the way it happens until it affects someone in their daily life. I don't think it does, which is why you're seeing this massive rise of the working class, shall we say, behind a figure like Tommy Robinson, because the whole concept of the man is that of the places where he grew up and the places where these grooming gangs are coming from and that sort of thing are places where it's interesting to see that I can't remember who it was, but someone said, we grew up with the, people of all colors and all creeds, and the one thing that united us was that we were all English. And that was the key. And he's saying now we're not seeing that integration and that segregation, self-segregation of the whole multi-culti thing. And it's not worked. That experiment has not worked. But people in places which are quite hegemonic, not hegemonic, homogenous, don't really see that kind of strife happening, because they're not on the border of the divisions of the places where these divisions are happening. And those people are reacting very, very strongly. And then they're being tarred by the other people as, things which they are not. And I'll tell you why, like the accusation of racist, for instance, is one of the worst things, because one of two things will happen. Either they will know full well that they are not a racist, and they will attack you directly because they know they are not a racist, and how dare you call them a racist. Or they will be continually called a racist until the point where they go, do you know what? Screw it. I am a racist then. And if this is racism, I am. And then they carry on and they self-declare it, and they perpetuate harmful stuff. Whereas you get someone who's saying, I just don't like this aspect of society, and it's an idea that I don't like, and it's a behavior I don't like. It's not about the person. And it's quite ironic as well to call the working classes racist, when those are the people who've grown up usually in the most diverse neighborhoods in terms of background, because any migrant who comes to this country typically comes, unless they have a job lined up and they're highly qualified, with nothing, because they want to make a better life for themselves here, and they're inclined to come and they set up a business, or they come and they get a job and they move in and try and integrate, and that's basically their whole shtick. But they have to come in at the bottom,
yes,
and get used to the system and learn the language properly, and get used to the education system. And if they bring children, they need to integrate them as well. So it's there's that. But then you get these segregated communities, which I will refuse to call communities for any longer. They are colonies. These segregated colonies, because that's exactly what they are. Trying to spread their culture here and corrupt the whole area around them. And it's like, well, if you were doing that through the democratic process, from the point of view of English, but you're saying no democracy, and democracy is kind of one of those fundamental pillars of our society.
I can see where you're going with colonies. I still think it's a somewhat awkward term to choose, because colony would kind of suggest, in a way, in one's mind, a kind of outside control of it. Do you understand what I mean? As if kind of Pakistan had formed a colony within Britain.
Well, you could say
And
a colony
in a
from.
way, it is true that these people are kind of self-segregating, but it isn't really under the control of the society back home. Do you understand what I mean?
I know, but then the dictate, like, I mean, the two communities I'm specifically thinking of are the Indian community and the Muslim community, because those are the two big ones that self-segregate deliberately. The Indian community in particular is a colony in the sense of the families back home control the families in the UK. I was talking to a young Indian girl as well who said to me that if she had dated a white man, and she lived in Birmingham, right? So it's not exactly like she's living in Bengal or something like that, and if she had dated a white man, her dad would throw her out the house. She'd be destitute. She would never inherit anything, and all that jazz. So you're going, good grief, this sort of control, and that's come from.
One of the things that I almost felt tempted to point out to my, my fellow interlocutors who were calling me white supremacist last night and today, was to put that to them. But it's very difficult to kind of explain that in tweets because you're so limited in what you can actually say in such a shorter space of time. And the one thing I wanted to point out to them was not so much, what does the family do if it's a white man? Because that is already that's already stark enough. But imagine, if you will, if it were a black man. Because the simple truth is that these various ethnic groups tend to be very hostile toward each other.
Oh yes,
but that type of racism is never touched upon. The only people who are racist are us.
Oh yes, of course. And the idea that I love the fact that at one point I believe someone tried to tar us all entirely with the idea of colonization in its entirety was tied to Britain or something, and you just think, I wonder about all those French-speaking Walloons in Africa, or perhaps the Chinese-speaking people,
Yeah,
or the fact
that we get entire Tanganyika land for Heligoland.
Yes,
we did a little trade with the Germans, so all that part of kind of southern East Africa that was in control of the Germans then came to Britain. But prior to that, it was very much run by the Teutons. And apparently they weren't quite as nice to the local population as we were afterwards.
No, funny that. You'll also notice that
yes.
You'll also notice that we gave back independence over time, which is something that not many other colonized
we didn't
areas
try and slaughter them all in order to hang on to the territory.
No. In response to Silly Sailor, just quickly, who says, "Is there any liberalist activity in Scotland?" Yes, we have a very heavy Scottish liberalist and active Scottish liberalist presence, and they have their own little subgroup as well. So tweet me at not __ so _obvious. Or
you need to do something about those underscores.
I know it's terrible, isn't it? But I couldn't get anything else. Like, what else can I call myself? Not so obvious 3 or something. I may change it, but basically, just get in contact with that. And there's a guy called David Ballantyne who will sort you out and get you in meetups and that sort of thing. He's really good. Pretty much every civilization is colonized, and certainly every civilization has conquered or attempted to conquer. There is not a pacifist nation on earth.
Yes. I mean, when you look at the Indian tribes and the tribes of South America and whatever, they were quite happily conquering each other.
I did get into a fun little spat with someone who said over Wakanda when Black Panther came out, talking about the fact that Wakanda is what Africa could have been,
Yes, of
should,
course.
right?
Of course.
And this thing, even though Wakanda hasn't developed socially at all, it's just developed technologically due
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
an external source. Anyway,
So basically, it's
as
technological, but and on the level of society, it's still stuck in the Zulu land. Yes.
yes, with ritual combat and all that. But fictional lands aside, I was arguing from the point of view. I said, ask Ethiopia how it's doing then, because Ethiopia happens to be quite a mineral-rich land. It also happens to be a place that rejected and pushed out its colonizers twice, and was still being run by Ethiopian warlords prior to that. And they were saying, "Oh, they were colonized. They were colonized by the British and the French." And I did point out that was for less than 4 years.
Yeah.
And you go,
Well,
in terms of historical speaking, that is no time at all.
yeah. I mean, it's. I remember I read this book, Why the West Rules, and then in brackets for now. And it's a very interesting read. Once again, it's one of those things that I kind of did bit by bit, because trying to read it as one block is just that tiresome. Because unlike Academic Agent, I can't just burrow into these dry non-fiction books without just getting bored beyond my, bored out of my skull. But I like sort of some of the concepts that are kind of being debated there. And one of the things that was touched upon with Africa is that it really had a disadvantage right from the beginning. So right from the offset of starting civilization, it was disadvantaged.
Yes.
Because it doesn't have any animals that can be turned into beasts of burden. And when it comes to the actual staple grains and foods, it has much less to actually start with. So I think he kind of made a list of how many grains there were in the Mediterranean basin that could actually be turned into wheat and various forms of staple food. And there was something like 26 different types of grain in the Mediterranean basin. Yet in Black Africa, there was something like 3.
Yes.
So you immediately realize how hamstrung they were. So they didn't have any animal power, and they had, much less reliable food sources. Now, if you go back to the very beginnings of civilization, you can see why that wouldn't really give you an ideal start right from the beginning, and how it is that other societies therefore get an advantage of starting out long before you can even get off the ground. And the same was the case with the Americas and whatever. So
Yes,
there's a reason why certain parts of the world got a head start.
Yes, I believe it's Guns, Germs, and Steel that does a very good job of explaining this.
Actually, that was one of the books that I've sort of got on my list of one of them that I want to look at once. Yeah.
But it's very dry, I warn you. But
it might actually be by the same author. I'm not sure.
Yes, but geographical problems and the idea of where everything sits and is contributes. I mean, you just take something like the weather patterns, right? Britain has a very stable but sort of slightly miserable weather pattern compared to the Mediterranean, which is sort of storms at one point and then the rest of the time it's hot and lovely. But if you've ever tried to work in the Mediterranean, it's awful. You couldn't do it. I mean, everybody bunks off to the beach because it's nice and humans like it.
You have problems kind of working according to what one would call the Protestant work ethic, but at the beginning you have a great advantage because it's easy to stay alive. Whereas if you think of it, if you look at your average Norman castle here in Britain, and you look at the kind of keep and you sort of think, well, that's where the Lord would have lived. And you then ask yourself, how would you fare trying to go through the winter in one of those stone towers?
Yes.
And you would think, well, more than likely I would die of pneumonia. And the thing is, that was the spoilt chap. That was the guy who had the castle.
Yes, you don't see the hovel.
We would more than likely even die in those circumstances. And that's just it. Living in northern climes was a grave disadvantage. when, at times when we didn't have central heating and things like that. The
Yes.
more technologically advanced we effectively became, it then became an advantage because we weren't subject to the stifling summer heat of the Mediterranean. But until then, it was a great advantage actually hanging around the Mediterranean, which is, of course, why all the early civilizations are down there.
Yes, yes, indeed.
But
Goodness
actually,
me.
just to come back to what I was kind of touching upon before when I was doing my liberal Democrat spiel,
Mm.
that is why I am somewhat skeptical, because of what I explained before of the merger of the Social Democrats and the Liberals. That is why I'm somewhat skeptical at the idea of a liberalist takeover of UKIP. Because you have to understand that the UKIPers, yes, there were a lot of people who wanted the referendum and whatever, but if you look at the heart of them and whatever, many of them were actually right-wing conservatives. So people from the conservative right.
I will just correct you there on a semantics case and say that he's not a liberalist. The liberalists are not attempting to take over anyone.
Okay, yes.
And Sargon wants to do it, but the liberalists aren't doing it in any
yes, but there was, let's say there are lots of liberalist sympathizers who would be part of this.
Sure.
And the thing is, trying to marry the liberalist ethic with that of right-wing Tories, because the people in UKIP don't tend to be your average run-of-the-mill conservative. They tend to be the right wing of the party. They kind of recruited their people from there. So try and marry Count Dankula and someone from the right of the Conservatives, and tell me that works. And that's where. So that's where I foresee a problem.
I do find it funny. Yes,
because those people are not just all going to go away. Even if you manage, I mean, I can see the calculation here. I think they've got something like numbers of 21,000 in 2016, I believe. That was the number of party members.
So of UKIP.
Yes. So if only a if only a small part of the people who actually follow Sargon, who are from Britain, join UKIP, they could effectively represent a serious number within UKIP. So
in the last 12 hours, 10,000 people joined them.
Yes. So I can see that makes perfect sense. But always remember, those others, they're not just going to go and jump off the end of the pier. So what's the compromise that comes out of this?
You need to have a consistency. I mean, we saw that with the coalition government with the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives themselves, where really the Liberal Democrats didn't really do anything to temper the Conservatives, and they either got completely cucked or they just didn't.
When it comes to the Liberal Democrats, they completely and utterly destroyed themselves.
Oh, yes.
I mean, people are always they're always talking about the tuition fees. I can honestly say I don't think it had anything to do with the tuition fees. It was they made some dramatic errors. So, for example, they invested all their political capital into getting a referendum on the voting system.
Yes.
And it was clear they were going to lose because both the Conservatives and Labour were going to campaign against them. So it was the Liberal Democrats, campaigning for a change in the voting system against Labour and the Conservatives. And they invested all their political capital as a coalition partner into that one move. Once they had lost that, which was inevitable, they had no more political capital to spend. So as far as strategy was concerned, that was already completely daft. But aside from that, they also did some serious serious mistakes. One of them, for example, was the Great Repeal Act. So they had put into their manifesto, just as they had the tuition fees thing, they had put into their manifesto, if we get into power, we will enact a Great Repeal Act. And in that Great Repeal Act, we will throw in all the ludicrous laws that have been introduced in Britain over the years, and we'll get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
And people, that was a generally very popular policy. And when it came to negotiations, the coalition negotiations between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives accepted the Great Repeal Act. They did not accept tuition fees.
Yes.
So effectively, people were sort of saying, oh, it was a betrayal of the students. Well, no. If you have coalition talks, then you have to get your coalition partner to accept it. If he doesn't, well, what can you do? So,
particularly if it's the bigger fish.
Yes. So they didn't get the tuition fees, and to a certain extent, to anybody who in a way understands how coalitions form, well, that was understandable. But they did get the Great Repeal Act, and that was actually even very popular with a great many backbench Tories, because everybody knows of one or two pieces of legislation that they would like to see the back of.
Yes.
And here was finally the chance of Britain clearing house and getting rid of a load of nonsense, because we are so keen on introducing nonsense law. I mean, just look at this upskirting bill that they've now proposed.
I was going to bring this up because you
seriously, we need upskirting laws just like we need a hole in the head.
I just saw your latest the week that was just this morning, actually, over breakfast, and I just saw it was just the vehemence. I mean, you're a man who is very reserved. You're a man who is very, very specific with what he says, and I could just hear the malice.
You could hear my teeth grinding, could you?
The frustration, not and as well as your what do you think you're doing to the sort of rowdier crowd of
the Tommy Robinson supporters who try to bully you into doing what they want you to do.
You're like, how are you any better than the people you're opposing at this point?
Precisely. And what impression do you think this gives?
Yes.
Towards the people that you are hoping to win over? Because I kind of pointed out to them, look, I'm one of the centrists, so I'm not a left-winger. So effectively, I am the sort of constituency you should be trying to win.
The swing.
You are trying to tell me how I am to behave so that I don't upset your sensitivities. And you just go, I'm sorry, this is supposed to win me over. Are you, and if it's happening to my channel, it's happening to other channels.
Yes.
And therefore, you are clearly making yourself appear obnoxious to the very people who are out there who are in a position to effectively influence public opinion.
Maybe I should change my name.
This is a good idea.
Maybe I should change my name to Not So Obnoxious.
Not as obnoxious as you might think.
Oh dear. Somewhat obnoxious. Maybe I should call myself somewhat obnoxious.
Dominic would like that a great deal, I'm quite sure.
I'm fairly certain. Yes, he would love that.
Let's hope that Dominic hasn't committed to drinking a shot every time we say somewhat again.
Yes, we can't afford to have another death on our hands.
But yes, so that tickled you, did it? The whole thing about the upskirting bill. But
yes,
this is just it. We have these habits of getting into a moral panic and then introducing very, very badly drafted law.
Well, this is quick. I mean, just off the top of my head, I can think of the fox hunting bill, which was something similar, and I can think of the shut up, cat. I apologize for that, but I can think of the sort of like Obamacare in the US and that sort of thing, which just had an absolutely appalling sort of rush through without anything.
Well, I mean, over here you can go back to 1980s or whatever, where they introduced the video nasties list. So effectively, they had a blacklist of videos they didn't like that would then get banned. And if a new kind of zombie movie came out or whatever, they would add that to the video nasties list. And it was kind of one of these, this is what I mean, it was one of these moral panics that kind of took hold of newspapers like The Sun and the Daily Mail, who were basically, how can the government stand by whilst our children are exposed to this filth? It's that kind of situation where they then decide, oh, we must do something. We must be seen to be doing something. And then they introduce completely nonsensical law whereby they just ban something at random.
Yes, that's the main. It's like when you talk about being laws work when they're very, very specific. Vague laws are so much more open
Well,
to
one
abuse.
of the beauties, of course, is that you know how they like enforcing human rights law if it means that a terrorist can somehow not be deported
Convicted.
or something like that. But
Yes.
they don't like to enforce other parts of human rights law because one part of one specific area of human rights law deals with they're not you cannot be found guilty for something for which there is no law.
Mm,
And into that same area falls a kind of subsection of that, which means you must also be able to understand that it is illegal. So
yes.
the idea, you know how one likes to say ignorance of the law is no defense? Yes, that is if it actually can be discerned that what you're doing is wrong.
Mm,
So, if it is actually clear, if it would have been clear that what you were doing was wrong if only you knew the law, then that is ignorance is no defense. But if
yes.
they come up with some bizarre, vague statute, which you look at and you just go, I'm sorry, but what on earth is this supposed to mean? And you may even get yourself legal advice. And the lawyer tells you, well, I can't tell you.
Yes.
Then how can ignorance be no defense?
One of
Because,
the
and we do have laws like that, where where you look at it and you just go, what is this to mean? And where it will actually take the period of several court cases, several sort of benchmark cases that eventually come to create a definition of a law. And the reason, this comes about in this fashion is because Parliament passes a law and absolutely nobody understands what it is to mean. So over a period of court cases,
Mhm.
the law courts eventually work out a convention as to how they define this. But prior to their doing that, nobody has any way of knowing what the law is to mean.
No,
So when they create terms like if it is to be banned, it must be obscene. Well, what is obscene? What's obscene under law?
yes. Well,
If,
it's like Dankula and the offense thing.
yes, if
It's
they create another law in which they say it must be disgusting, and you just go, what is the legal definition of disgusting? And you will find that it takes several cases for them eventually to create a case history whereby the courts themselves can then even know what it means. And then you are in a position to go to a lawyer and say, look, am I actually allowed to do this or not? Is there a law against this? What is your advice?
mm,
Then the lawyer can actually say to you yes or no. But prior to that, when not even the legal experts can discern what the gobbledygook is to mean that Parliament has created, then I don't understand how people could possibly be punished if nobody could actually discern prior to those court cases having come about,
mm.
what the legal definition could possibly be.
I
Because
agree.
when they come up with some of this stuff, it is so vague and it is so impossible. When you read some of these legal texts, you despair. I mean, I remember a Tory, I think his name was Garnier, I think they have still got one or two Garniers in place now. I'm not sure that chap is still around. He was a Queen's Counsel, and he was a committee member, and he got to see one of the laws that were being proposed. And at first he was all for it because it had a nice name and it sounded like something that a Conservative would be all in favour of.
Yes.
But once he had actually looked at the small print of it, he famously said, this proposed statute has got the potential of bringing the law itself into disrepute.
This is one of those things that really, like the media and people who don't read get really hung up on. Like it's like the diversity and tolerance bill, or you could make something and you could call it, I don't know, the free hugs bill.
Yes.
It could be
in America you could call it the Patriot Act.
Yes, or something like that. And you just go, what a fine name that is. It sounds good or whatever. But when MPs object, typically they don't do it off the face of the name.
Yes.
They do it over, the intricacies of the bill, and they may be all in favour of what the bill is attempting to achieve.
But when Christopher Chope stands up and calls out object, and thereby scuppers the upskirting bill.
Yes, it's like
they seem to. The entire media, Parliament, everybody pounces on him. But in fact, he made a perfectly good, principled stance.
Yes, he says this is already covered under current stuff and it's not been scrutinised enough. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to take. Whereas they seem to say, you're in favour of taking photos at women's skirts.
Yes, imagine for a moment that normally when a bill is proposed, it gets scrutiny from committees, from all sides. Legal experts look at it, paid for by the government and whatever. But remember, that is a bill that has been drafted by the government itself. So even though, Sir Humphrey and whatever has pored over it, advising the minister and whatever, and
Indeed.
all the experts have provided input, it then still gets scrutinized by the committees and by everybody else in Parliament.
Yes, and it should.
This is a bill drawn up. This is a private member's bill.
Oh yes, by a single member.
Bill written by a single member of Parliament. And because it's got the backing of the Prime Minister and because the media like it, we've decided we will not scrutinize it at all.
Yes, it must just be perfect.
So I'm sorry, the bill that is written by one person isn't given any scrutiny, whereas the bill that has basically been drafted by committees of experts and whatever, that still needs the scrutiny of the entire Parliament.
Scrutinized as well. One of the things which back when Jordan Peterson was opposing Bill C-16 prior to its passing, that he was going on was, and the thing which I think he should have lent on even more personally, is this idea that he says what you are proposing will not achieve the desired result that you expect. And that is the main bulk of everything. You are massively limiting people's freedom to express themselves correctly and honestly for the sake of something which will not even work.
Well, I mean, over here, there is, I don't know, I could well imagine the Canadians do something similar because they've got a similar system to ours. But over here in the British Parliament, whenever the government, at least, this obviously wouldn't happen with a private member's bill, but when the government proposes law, they are also obliged to provide what is called an impact assessment. So there must be an assessment of the impact. So they must work out how many, if they introduce a law, then obviously laws are there to be broken. So effectively, how many court cases do we envisage coming about because of this? How many possible prisoners do we think this thing will generate? What costs to the public purse do we actually think this will have?
Yes, because that was one other thing about the severity of the punishment for upskirting being up to 2 years, and you're going, it costs 35 grand a year to
Yes,
house these
precisely.
people,
And
and you
that's the
go,
low estimate of cost
yes,
per prisoner.
is it worth you paying out in your tax money 70 grand because some pervert took a thing? Or would you not much rather say, I don't know, give them an ASBO or something,
Yeah,
and that sort of thing, which is already
precise.
under
It's
common law.
already there under outraging public decency. But in this case, it is looked at in a way that it ought to be looked at. That basically, let's face it, if you've got a situation where some lads at a pop concert are photographing some girls under their skirts,
Mm.
as was the example used by the BBC when talking about this case, and that because that's what happened to a young woman who launched this campaign for this particular law.
Yes.
If you're thinking of some lads doing that, are they really just doing that for a lark, or are they doing that because they're sex perverts?
Yes.
I don't think that there is anybody that is somehow driven by kind of strange voyeuristic urges to do this. So the idea that you create a separate sexual offense, as though this was something
Oh, yes.
akin to kind of pedophilia or something like
Oh,
that,
yes. And put them on the same register.
and then put them on the sex offenders register. That's when you look at this and you just go, I'm sorry, but most of these cases, well, if not, let's face it, all of these cases, if we're really, will be kind of some chaps having a laugh, having perhaps had too much to drink and so on, being in a setting like a pop concert or something like that. These are not kind of hardened perverts, so to speak. Do
Oh,
you
yes,
understand what I
doing
mean?
it around with a massive
And
catalogue of upskirt photos that is going
yes,
around on their
precisely.
upskirting ring
Yeah, and
of people.
there's upskirting pictures being traded on the dark web. You can't really see that happening, can you? So,
Just to jump on Elizabeth's point, of course, this would all be solved if all women wore a hijab in the UK.
of course, yes. But no, it just is bizarre that you should try and kind of use a sledgehammer of this nature to kind of create a separate new sexual offense to deal with something that is so frivolous and so
Yes.
completely inconsequential that you just feel, I'm sorry, this is complete overkill. And when you then hear that, I think it was the Associated Press, they kind of looked into it, and it had something like 78 complaints in 3 years, of which the police decided to pursue 11. So in 3 years, 11 cases. Now, either this is because the police, like with Rochdale or whatever, are turning a blind eye to an absolute
Yes, and
epidemic
the
of crime.
epidemic. It didn't. Don't you go down your local shop? They're all in the supermarkets. You can see them all holding
Yes,
their phones at knee
precisely.
level.
Either it's an epidemic and the police are turning a blind eye, or the police have truthfully only decided, look, there's only 11 cases, and that's over 3 years. And then you
Yes.
just look at that and you just go, I'm sorry, given the nature of this, given that it is so small, given that at the same time, we now need every minute of parliamentary time we've got to spare to talk about Brexit.
Yes, I was just about to bring this up. The fact that they're incapable of basically saying, yeah, the most important decision that's been made for nearly 100 years. Yeah, we're not going to, we don't have time for that, but, we can talk about this 11 case abstract upskirting bill.
Yeah, and it's absolutely ludicrous. And because, it was funny because just the week before I had mentioned the 15 amendments, so that when the Brexit bill, as it is travelling through Parliament, when it went through the House of Lords attached 15 amendments that it wanted.
Good
So
grief,
it
yeah.
has to go back to the Commons to be debated.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to imagine the Commons is made up of about 700 people.
Yeah.
And they've got 15 amendments to talk about. And this, as you say, this is the biggest decision since the Second World War. And you've got a great many people that might have something to contribute, and they have to talk about all the 15 amendments to see whether they reject them or not before they vote on them. And they were given 12 hours to debate it. That's less than an hour per amendment.
Yeah.
With possible 700 contributors.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
No.
And why are they given 12 hours? Well, because we just don't have any more parliamentary time. And after they've decided they don't have enough time to really talk about this in depth, what do? They then announce that they will find parliamentary time to get this upskirting bill through Parliament.
I'm starting to get the sense, Britisher, that this is somewhat getting your goat.
Just a tad. I think the reason I've got my sort of hooks into this one in particular is because it illustrates perfectly what is wrong with British politics in this day and age. You know, over the years, I have watched them talk about nonsense in Parliament, to the extent where really, you know, your head would begin to swivel. I mean, but they're particularly hung up on sexual matters. It's quite unbelievable the amount of time they have dedicated to talk about things related to genitalia and nipples and whatever is unbelievable. And meanwhile, we have real problems in this country.
Silly Sailor says, perhaps MPs are just more efficient than the unpopular opinions team.
Yeah, that must be it. Yeah, well put. Very well put. No, I mean, we had a situation I heard of once on the news a year or two ago, whereby in Scotland there was a mains burst. But this wasn't a mains carrying water. This was a big pipe carrying sewage.
Ugh.
And it burst, and then it ran onto the lower lying land.
Okay.
And the lower lying land happened to be a riding school. Now, you could imagine the riding school was somewhat out of business for a bit.
Yes.
The pipe was fixed and whatever, but now comes the real clanger, and that is that the riding school then found that it was obliged by law to clear up the land.
Yeah.
And it was required by law to clear up the land, not the water company whose sewage pipe had burst and flooded their land. Now, that they had, under law, they had no regress on the water company whatsoever.
Right.
So clearly there was something. Here was a situation that hadn't been foreseen.
Accounted for, yeah.
And I would be willing to bet money that has still not been amended.
Oh, right, yes, probably.
You know, so I've also heard of a situation recently where a very large building has kind of fallen between the cracks, and it fell between the cracks because the company that owned it went broke.
Yeah,
but it couldn't be sold by the receivers because it needed a lot of money spent on it.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any takers to take the building off the hands of the receivers. So the house then had no owner because nobody had purchased it. And at the same time, the company that had owned it no longer existed.
Yes.
But at the same time, for any developers who might touch it at a later date, they would be warned off by their legal advice saying, well, hang on a moment, if you develop this property, then the actual debtors, you know, the creditors of the company might have a claim on it. So this property suddenly ended up between a rock and a hard place. It could go nowhere.
Yes. I do love, however, that you're talking about this whilst chat is discussing the best way to wear a kilt.
Oh, well, there you go. Still, this is no doubt related to upskirting still. But
yes.
when it comes to this building, the reason this is so interesting is, of course, this building then stood in a state of disrepair for, well, close to 20 years.
Indeed.
And it thereby started becoming more and more dilapidated.
Yes, and even
And
less saleable.
all the structural work that needed doing to shore up the building so that it wouldn't collapse was then subject to the council.
Oh no.
So here you then have a building that nobody owns, but which the public purse needs to fork out money for once in a while, so that it doesn't become a danger to the public.
Yeah.
Because you don't want it falling onto a street now, do you?
No, not when you're responsible for it in the supposed interim.
Now, once again, this has been pointed out as a clear legal loophole that Parliament has not addressed. Now, remember, this building has now been... So this building cannot be the first building of this kind in history.
No.
But at the same time, this building in itself has already been falling apart for the last 20 years. So the MPs of the constituency of that particular building, as time went by, whoever these MPs were, they would have known about this case and could have brought it up in Parliament and could have could have mentioned it with ministers. Can we do something about this? Because clearly this is a legal nightmare. Nobody can touch the property.
Yeah.
The public purse is effectively responsible to make sure that it doesn't fall on anybody. But at the same time, nobody owns it and nobody can touch it, because otherwise the creditors might have redress. So clearly something needs doing. Has anything been done? Nothing. But they can still find time for upskirting.
Yes, they can still find all this time for these inane...
This is just it. They have wasted over the years. They have wasted an inordinate amount of time talking about the dangers to young people by video games and what to do about film censorship. And
yes.
I mean, pornography is one of their favorites. And page 3, don't get me started. The amount of times that the likes of Diane Abbott and Harriet Harman and feminist Labour MPs like that have talked about page 3 in the Houses of Parliament, it is unreal.
Not to mention Jess Phillips' mythical rape threats.
Yes, and then you have got, and I think prior to Diane Abbott, I mean, she was still around in the days of Diane Abbott, but I think she was a major politician under Tony Blair. There was Claire Short, who was again a devoted anti-page 3 Labour sort of frontbencher. So over the years, they've constantly had these people, and
I love
constantly wasted time on it.
Yes, indeed. I love the fact that they sort of crowed about it when it was finally removed, even though that was basically a market decision, because everyone wanted...
who had introduced it, who said, "I think this is no longer. I don't think this."
Well, people aren't buying the paper for it anymore. They can get far more hardcore stuff, shall we say, online.
So, it was a kind of cultural icon still, but he obviously realized, look, I think it's had its day. We're moving on. But this is the very same person who introduced it.
Yes.
And I think if you would ask him, he would not for a moment back down on this. But talking about page 3, he is an interesting one. Because of course it once again goes back to my old friend Tony Blair, whom I hate from the very pit of my little black heart. And that is, he made a significant part of page 3 illegal. And
yes, I recall. Yeah.
For any people who may collect page 3 photographs or something like that,
like the Britisher,
be warned. Be warned. You may be, in fact, a child pornographer.
Oh, wow. Why?
Because Tony Blair changed the law. Because you see, there was a law. There was not really a law. There was a convention in the law. As I say, a lot of British law basically just operated on an understanding. And that was that when it comes to pornography, you have to be 18 years old.
Yes.
But there was a clear understanding, as in, look, we know what pornography is. Okay? I mean, it's difficult to define, but we know what pornography is. When it comes to you're just basically standing there, topless, but your nether regions aren't even in the picture, or they are covered, then there was kind of an understanding that this wasn't really full-on pornography. And the British law therefore said, look, at 16, you are of the age of consent. So you can have full penetrative sex. So
Just somebody just take a little bit of a cap of that.
Yeah, of course.
The British have said the word sex.
Of course. So the thing is, so why shouldn't you be in a position to basically pose topless? And therefore, in British law, if you were 16, you could be a page 3 girl.
Right.
Now, the reason this is significant is because, of course, who was the most famous ever page 3 girl?
I don't know.
Samantha Fox. She became, on the basis of her fame as a page 3 girl, she then became a pop star.
Right.
She was one of these sort of 1 or 2 hit wonders, if you know what I mean. She was never heard of again. But she was rather, dare one say it, she was rather big in the 80s.
Okay.
Which is, of course, you'll forgive the double entendre.
Yeah.
But the thing is, many of her early photographs were actually of her under 18.
Right, yeah.
And then, of course, along comes Mr. Blair, and again he does his famous card trick. Oh well, we're just doing some a bit of a clearing up exercise with the law. I kid you not, that's what he said. We're doing a bit of a clearing up exercise of the law. We're just closing 1 or 2 little loopholes.
Yeah.
What nobody realized was he then introduced this strict anything under 18 is illegal.
Yeah.
So if you have got some cups and saucers up in the attic that are wrapped in old newspaper,
be warned.
You may in fact be a paedophile, because you may be in possession of child porn. Because if there is a page 3 image of that pre-late 1990s era, then you might have a 16-year-old topless on one of those newspaper pages. And one of the things with paedophile law is if you have it, you're guilty. And there's pretty much no defense. I actually happened to meet a lady who once upon a time was a page 3 girl.
Yeah, you met her in a back alley.
Of course, yes.
You paid her well.
A very attractive lady she was. I can attest that, definitely. But she got rather het up when you asked her about that, because she hated the idea that part of her youth had somehow been sullied and been officially turned into her somehow being exploited by pedophiles. Well, she saw it as a part of her youth that she was actually rather proud of. And, you can see how Blair kind of twisted and corrupted a great many things in that regard, for which there was absolutely no demand. There wasn't any great movement to do something about this, and yet he went ahead with it anyway. And when you look at it, you just think, I'm sorry, but where exactly were the great crimes committed that justify this change? But one brought it about anyway. Now, at the same time, one could have forgotten about that law and instead done something about rather large houses falling into disrepair and falling onto the high street. But, well, one had one's priorities.
Speaking of priorities, and to completely turn onto a different subject, how do you feel about the academic agent's latest video?
Remind me.
It is about the price of a cup of tea or coffee.
Yes, I know. He's
GE Coffee.
Yes, I remember. I was a coffee seller, wasn't I?
For those who don't know, the Britisher's face was placed on a coffee mug, and used as.
Yes, but it's worth pointing out that he uses a doctored version of my
Avatar.
with the rainbow flag behind
Yes.
me rather than the Union Jack.
To get around that horrible copyright stuff. Yeah. I just laughed.
He's doing it. I don't think he's doing it
Deliberately
because of copyright. No, this is just his way of trying to rub me up the wrong way.
Oh, we don't want to know about that. That sounds disgusting. But I just love the fact that it's a jab at you, and that he could have done it in pounds and with tea, but he did it in dollars with coffee.
With coffee, yes,
deliberately, so that you would be.
Well, he's got this way of doing things in this very academic way, which starts out very interesting, and then when you get about 15 to 20 minutes in, and you're still talking about fractions of dollars on dollar prices, you after a while lose the will to live.
I do enjoy the academic agent's content. However, that particular video, one, the music was too loud. So it got to the point.
I'm always surprised that for all his all his liking of rap music, he never sets anything to rap music. Have you noticed?
No, I genuinely think he should rap his next episode of whatever he does, and he should do it.
I would like to hear him rap some statistics.
And in rhyming slang as well. You can just imagine him doing that. But I tried to listen to it last night, and I couldn't get through it, the whole video, unfortunately.
Yes, I must confess I was in a similar territory. Yes, I may have to go back and listen to the end of it.
Well, apparently he's put me in there as well, although he's used my real face, which is interesting.
Were you one of the suppliers or purchasers?
I believe I was the fourth employee, and I put it.
I'm with you. Yes.
And I think I put it to him as something like, I see how it is. I'm the least profitable employee, and don't think I didn't notice that you've done that specifically.
You're the least effective, are you? Yes.
Yes, yeah, like the minimum standard of profit.
The most useless. Yes, you're the minimum wager. Yes.
Yeah. So it was just.
You're the one I have on a 0 hours contract.
Yes, I said. He said, on the face of real economics, you're the fourth employee. I said, I see you've used my real face, you monster. I see I'm the minimum viable profit increase for a business, whereas Ginger Bill gets to be the prime, and that sort of thing. So it's just.
Oh, yes, he does. He does have a way of having his digs at various people who are his acquaintances, doesn't he?
Surely at not
but
so.
We love him a great deal, I assure you.
Tacitus says I'm apparently black lesbian. Definitely not his character black lesbian on there. I don't even know who it is that he's referencing. I assume it's a BLM activist or something like that. Joan Everton says I think he should remove the music. I quite like it in the background, sort of, if it's quiet, but it has seemed to have got louder and louder, and his usual track is fine. But he did at one point switch to his sort of Black Pill soundtrack from his Migrant video. You know, the one he made about.
I can honestly say that I didn't notice the music so much because I'm actually concentrating on what he's saying.
Well, you concentrate on what he's saying, but it allows him to pause, and you're sort of still ticking along with the meter of the video. That's the point of it. I mean, I put music in my latest edited thing on Islam and Tommy Robinson, which if you haven't seen, you should go watch. Shameless plug. But I don't know. It was okay. I thought it sounded better with it, but you have to make sure it's quiet enough and it's just sort of a beat in the background.
Very good at setting a mood.
Yes.
So I normally don't really use music or whatever, but yeah, I have realized that when that little intro clip I've got of the cyber parse and whatever on my channel.
Oh yes, I know that one.
Something like that to music, it does give it a mood. Whereas if you're just basically talking about your annoyance at upskirting or whatever ludicrous latest feminist doctrine Netflix are enforcing on their film sets,
Oh my goodness!
then
The
you don't really need music, as far as I'm concerned.
5 seconds and no phone numbers. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the no phone numbers thing amuses me because it completely segregates men and women, because I'm assuming this is not being enforced in like across all people, but only between the genders. And but if you can't do that, you can't ever be friends with anyone you've ever met.
Yes. So any relationship you strike up with anybody can only ever be on your private time. And you just think, I'm sorry, but to how many people does that actually apply? I mean, how many people will meet their partner or partner to be, so to speak, at work
Yes,
or at
I
any
mean,
sort of business relationship?
many of my relationships, both friends and sort of significant others, have started typically at work
Well,
and
if you
outside of it.
think of it, that is the most substantial time that you actually spend out of your own home.
Mm.
So, in a way, that is the time in which you're most likely to bump into someone
Yes,
who is of interest.
and who you sort of have to get along with, and so you chat to and get to know. This is why, Britisher, that we interact almost exclusively over Twitter and YouTube, because
Because you fear otherwise I'll fall undying, immortally in love with you.
I think you already are, but only the
Well, I just
constraint.
haven't noticed it yet. Yes.
You have noticed it. Oh, you should see the racy
Well,
things
no,
that he
my
sends me.
subconscious is in love with you. My conscious just hasn't caught up yet.
Obviously. Um,
Or I'm
but
just living in denial, of course. It's one of those tragic love relationships.
indeed. Well, that sort of brings me to the end of sort of what I wanted to chat about this evening. But do you have anything interesting that you could talk about?
We've just been about everywhere, haven't we? We've talked about upskirting. We've talked about football. We've talked about AA. We've
Yes.
talked about parliamentary procedure. We've talked about buildings falling down and full penetrative sex, just in case you missed the other occasion when I said that.
I am so going to cut out you saying full penetrative sex, just like in there, and play it on like a soundboard during unpopular opinions.
This is actually talking about the full penetrative sex again. That is actually another one of those quirks of British law, and people have been done for this. So this is not a sort of hypothetical. It was once discussed as a hypothetical and then was ignored because, oh well, these people are ridiculous, but it happened anyhow. And that is that you can have a situation, obviously, where you have boyfriend and girlfriend, and she is 17 and he's 18.
Oh, isn't it Romeo and Juliet laws or something?
Well, no, it's perfectly legal. I mean, both of them are above the age of consent. They can have sex with each other. There's no problem. But you do see that there might be another problem. So the two of them can have sex, but he is not permitted to own a topless photo of her.
Yes.
Because if he is found to be in possession of a topless photo of her, she is under 18.
Do you know what the worst thing is?
So he is a paedophile.
The even worse than that, she is not allowed to own a topless photo of herself. And we have seen this happen where teenagers now have been, I don't know, screenshotting sort of naughty photos on Snapchat and the like, and they get done and put on the sex offence register.
Yes, they get
for
put
owning
on the
child
sex offenders register as paedophiles. Yes.
Because they're 16 years old and they are, taking photos with one another and enjoying it, shall we say?
Yeah. No, it's bizarre, and you can see that we really have problems in that particular area of the law. And if the parliamentarians ever would actually develop a spine and realize that it's their responsibility to provide, useful law to the country, then they would actually sit down and do something about it. But instead, they would sooner talk about upskirting.
Which is ridiculous.
I mean, it's the same thing with euthanasia in this country, isn't it? That if you really have got a horrible, horrible disease you're dying from or whatever, you can travel abroad and have an end made to it.
Yes.
So effectively, all the MPs know that should something like that ever happen to them, they will be able to go to Switzerland or to Holland and have an end
A
made.
short stay in
But
Switzerland, yes.
that doesn't mean that they would necessarily want to expand that right, the hoi polloi, being able to have something done about it here in Britain.
Yeah. No, there is a lot that I'm frustrated about with our parliamentarians.
And what I mean is, these are open questions that we all know one day will need addressing. Something actually needs to be done in these spheres.
Oh yes, but this would take some deep thought, and if you make the perceived incorrect decision on it, it's career-ending.
Well,
This is why the serious decisions don't want to be made over certain.
Remember, they also don't have any parliamentary time to talk about it.
Yes, that's ridiculous. Anyway, I apologize. This is a slightly shorter Fake Accents Unite tonight. However, I hope I shall have you on for another one at some point.
I'm sure you will be able to drag me out of my little shell.
You'll be fawning and playing the guitar under my window at night, so I appreciate that.
I mean, obviously. I mean, it's not really a guitar, it's a lyre.
It's a lyre, yes. You've carved it yourself. And I shall bring articles and a little more direction, although it is obviously entertaining to chat. And I will try and bring Sarah and potentially some other guests on as well. And you are welcome to bring your friends as well, Britisher, if you're so inclined, and put me onto those. But it's a pleasure as always to have you here chat and to listen to our little ramblings.
And it has been a pleasure to be invited here again, as per usual.
Indeed. Well, take care and have a good week, and we will catch you next time on Fake Accents Unite.
Toodle pip.